So the forest was just a gigantic canopy. When the cloud cover came in October, and you know how it stays here until March basically. If you were trying to navigate by the stars, you'd be in big trouble if there was a cold front moving in or you were running out of food. So the trail marker trees, being spaced as a rule no more than 2 miles apart, gave the natives a basic guideline. When you found one, you would, follow that basic direction. Again, these things aren't written in as strictly as what we refer to, the European version of looking at things. They were a little more flexible. If you were bright enough to find one, you knew that within 2 miles you would find another, and that would give you your basic direction to keep you out of swampy areas where you'd get wet and cold. They usually worked you on a high ridge. And later, the surveyors that we had do the road systems here kind of took advantage of that, because most of the main highways like Green Bay, Milwaukee, again 83, State Road, a lot of these highways here were basically, they did nothing but follow the same route that the Indians were using. Well, we got the green light on the project earlier this year, and basically I've done nothing else for 12 to 15 hours a day, including holidays and my birthday, for the last, basically for the last 5 months. Just totally focusing on what you're seeing in front of you. So for articles of trade, you could follow these trails all the way up into Wisconsin. They had a lot of meeting areas up by Door County, and other tribes would do the same thing. But to get back during storms or darkness, you needed something other than just your sense, because the forest was just immense and too dense. It's hard to say like how much time, that's the physical time you could, hit me with a stopwatch. All the time you spend figuring out the engineering that goes into the inside of this so that it can stand up on its own with, over half a ton of material, which the majority of it is hanging in the air, because Lake County had more of these trees, per area than any other area in the Great Lakes region. They were bringing people into the stone quarries by Lake Michigan. They were taking people right along this highway out here, is what we call 83, but actually that was the Porcupine Trail. And it took people from what we refer to as the Chicagoland area all the way up to Eagle River, which a lot of people are familiar with, and points off of that. There's a steel skeleton that goes from the back part of the trunk. It's 2 inches square and goes the entire curve of the whole sculpture and into every arm. And that again is welded to the back of the steel plate that the trunk sits on. So there's a lot more going on than you're seeing. And even that part had to, I was working on that for the last couple years, mentally making notes, talking to my uncle who was an engineer and a scientist, and my dad, and other friends. You have to get other opinions.
Yeah.
Nothing this big is completely done by you, and anyone who says they do completely everything themselves, you can't. And then the state line road, which would cut in half here, that's obviously east, is about a mile from here, and that would take you, basically you'd go all the way from the Mississippi, and they'd have trees leading you all the way over, so you would hit the right part of Lake Michigan and not wind up in Indiana, or we had to design a steel 1/8-inch plate that's inside of the tree that has a 50-gallon drum that's welded to the plate, and that fits up inside the tree itself in a hollowed out cavity, and then is retained by 2 steel kingpins with 2 steel tracks that you slide it into, and then you can fill that drum with either sand or water, depending on if it's going to be somewhere for a real long time. I'd put sand in it, and by doing that you would add an additional 600 to 700 pounds of counterbalance, which it doesn't need. I can stand up on top of the tree right now the way I've designed it. A lot of them outside of designating destination or direction would designate destination. In other words, they would have different bends in the tree, similar to what this one is here. The belief on these is that this is a destination, not a direction. In other words, this could either depict that there's a cave shelter, and again, the cave entrance would be hidden. You'd know to find the cave, based on what your grandfather taught you, or your uncles, or your brother, and then you would cover it up again. But you would know, okay, now we've been following these trees for 40 miles, and it's time to, get some rest. Here's the destination tree. Okay, there's probably something stashed inside. There's probably a spring near here. That's why they would pick it. When I was finished with it, or when I brought it here, everyone assumed that it was done. Granted, it did look nice, and I had photos, and it was in the the local papers. But that was just the beginning. I've been out here since I believe it's Tuesday last, so whatever that is, last 9 or 10 days. Yeah. And other ones would designate that you cross the river on a rock bed rather than in the muck. Again, if it's wintertime, we don't want to have our horses and all of our clothing get soaked to the bone crossing the rock river or the Des Plaines. You want to cross that river where there's a hard base, so your horse only gets cold up to his knees. Rather than you going swimming and taking mud off and having to stop and start a fire. It's like basically a recipe. You start with your darker colors, and then you go to your lighter charcoals. I doubt if many people would think that tree has that in it, a mustard color, the brown. Some of the triple trees, they said, were representational of camp. In other words, like village areas or seasonal hunting grounds. Again, it's like, okay, this is the area we want to be in now. This is the edge of the forest where the buffalo will come during the migration time, or this is the summer camp. We've arrived. If you think of a tree this size, which would be approximately 400 years old, and you'd have to have another one growing, so it was a thing that was taught and passed on father to son. You had to be starting to bend one somewhere in the area, and then as you grew up, you'd have to teach your son to maintain it, and then later to remove the curve that went down to the ground and burn that, so you would have the little elbow at the end, and groom one branch that would go skyward. I grew up on what we called Mission Hills subdivision. It was Maple and Sanders Road, about 3 miles outside of town. That was when Ken Canole's parents still had 750 head of cattle, and Sanders, where the whole Allstate empire is now. That was just a cattle ranch. And then on the north side of us, which would have been the other side of Walters, was a 250-acre pumpkin farm slash, whatever else the man would grow. I think the guy's name was McGregor. We used to try to get pumpkins out of there around Halloween. Bill Olson, another Northbrook resident, when he found out what I was doing, he grew up out by Sanders and Oak Avenue, and he's been in the trucking business. And when he found out that I was doing this, he basically volunteered the use of his crew and a semi to bring it from where I had it out here. We had to bring a semi out onto the highway. I went to Grove School for kindergarten, the old Grove School, which is now I think a nursery or a greenhouse. And then I went to St. Norbert's for 8 years, and then I went to Glenbrook North. And after that I went down to Southern Illinois. And then we took this huge trailer behind the logs over here. It's a big flatbed. And the owner, Brian, has basically a forklift that he uses for, he does these gigantic ponds. I got most of my art training at Glenbrook North. At the time I didn't realize how good a school Glenbrook North was. I had to learn that after I got away and compared it to other schools. But we had Miss Parker was there, Kiji. The the things we had to work with, I didn't realize how good they were. I mean, we were able to do everything from, casting small bronzes to, we had a kiln that you could practically walk into. And the teachers knew what they were talking about. They weren't trying to completely control you. They were trying to, open your eyes a little bit and let you try different things. So we had to take it off the semi with 9 guys. I called up 9 local guys plus Billy. And we literally, because the statue is just about a little over half a ton. And to manhandle something like that, it's got that awkward shape. So what we had to do is basically have the forklift hold the trunk section, and the 9 men, we just kind of wrestled it up onto the flatbed, then drove it back here. So if I had to be honest, I would say I probably learned more about art at Glenbrook than I did at Southern. And after that, then what I decided was, basically based on what Kiji told me, he said, don't try to be like someone else. Just, you'll be less popular in the beginning, but work on what you believe in, and sooner or later, hopefully other people will believe in it too. So I'm hoping that theory works. It's been a real blessing having this atmosphere to work in, for preparing it for the actual show. The tree will be on display at the Wildlife Prairie State Park. It's for the first international outdoor heroic and life-size sculpting competition. It's a national and international show, but it is nice. There's a $60,000 purchase award prize for the show, and it's been nationally averaged. It's been in all of our trade magazines. This isn't, it's not a small event. So, this is a snapping turtle carving, and this was on a beech tree in Dowagiac, Michigan. A different form of a trail marker tree. Couldn't have that here because we really don't have that many beech trees to begin with. And the tree was on the farmer's property when his father's father took over the land in the 1800s. And when he was a young man, he was told by the local Potawatomi Indians there that, and this piece was, they said originally, about 8 inches. And it was carved on the tree, and what it did was the tail was curved to indicate that there was a stream, freshwater source to the right of the tree. Beech trees were used. The hide on a beech tree, the bark, is almost like an elephant hide. When you carve into a birch tree, you'll lose the image after a while. It will grow over it. With a beech tree, the bark expands and the carving actually expands as the tree grows. So this that you're looking at, this measures approximately 28 inches now from bottom to top. And this tree, this is a section, of bark that's huge. And we saved the section of bark. And the reason, again, they used them is because it would retain the figure that they would make, and they have a long life. 300, 400, 500 years is not a problem. Painting is basically what I do the majority of the time, and that's what people know me for. Those are the research pieces, and for those, the Lake County Forest Preserve has given me permission to go out and gather native grasses, and they would have used those grasses basically for their mats and weaving in baskets. And what I tried to do was use their native materials to actually make the paper for paintings that I would do of the research of the patterns that they would put on there. The form of what they refer to as the underwater panther, Potawatomi, Menominee, Ojibwa, most of the tribes around the Great Lakes area have a version of it. And these would have appeared on, baskets, cradle boards, any of their personal effects. So this is actual symbolism, and again, this is on paper that I make, and the paints are also made. People have preconceived ideas of what artists should or shouldn't do. No one has a problem with a musician that can play the piano, sing, play the guitar, and play the harmonica. And I feel the same way about art. Sculpting to me is no different than painting. If you love either one of them, one's just a different form of the other one. It's just adding one more level to what you do. some of the grasses that we would break down and actually make into the paper, but Perry Crates was kind enough to donate this to the studio because he saw what I was doing by hand, and he said he had a wine press that it's either a wine or apple press. I guess you could convert it to anything you want, but we kind of snugged it up, and what I did was make these boards, and you'd have these felt pads between the paper, and the paper would be on there. Then you place another board down on top of the paper, and you have your felt pads between there, and then basically you work this down, and it will smooth them out and make them flat, and then you leave them in there, and then hopefully when you take them apart, if you've done everything right, then we hang them on the clips and we let them dry. These are most of the paper's out of here, but these are just some examples that didn't pass the test. I mean, they're good enough to do something on, or I could use them for a project, but the ones that I try to use for the actual paintings, I try to meet a little higher standard. In other words, they're flatter and truer than those. And then I make the paints, basically. Some of them are out of crushed ironstone, some of them are out of pokeweed, some of them are out of elderberry plants, and a variety of other ones that I won't get into. But after you're all done, you wind up with about this much material for about 2 poly buckets, 5-gallon buckets worth of the husks, and then you've got to ferment that for anywhere from 6 months to 9 months, and then you smash that and you remove the nuts, and then you boil down. What's left is the husk actually gives you the color, and then you boil that and strain it, and you wind up with some really nice pure black walnut stain. In other words, it's materials they would have used themselves on basically paper made from plants they would have used for their personal items. But I've always, I've done small side horse, gymnastic sculptures, obviously the tree, and a lot of Native American, like symbolic sculptures. Some of the things I do are actually more three-dimensional than the paintings, and especially like the framework, the inlay work. A lot of the frames I do are referred to as sculpture, and they've won basically awards for being sculpture. This is quill work, carved in and then inlaid. This is fragments of pipestone and arrowheads that weren't good enough to keep as actual pieces, but I wanted to incorporate them into the framework for the art. This is the sunburst, which was a common symbol, and this is the raining moon. And for the raining moon, I used quartz inlay for the moon part, and then carved the porcupine quills into tracks going down and tipped the ends of them with shark's tooth. And these corner dovetails aren't wood, that's inlaid pipestone fragments from artifacts from campsites. This is my inheritance from my grandfather. This frame here is made by Nicholas Downs. So the frame thing might again it might be in the gene pool. I mean the woodwork is bizarre, and the fact that it's all done by pressure points that you get to put it together once and it's kind of locks together. That was the idea behind it. But this frame was hand carved. There's no nails in it. All of those pieces of wood are interlocked, and I've never had the guts to take it apart for the fear that I wouldn't be able to get it back together. And then some of the woods that I use in the frames for those pieces are woods they would have used for their daily utensils. Like the basswood was considered sacred by a lot of the Great Lakes area Indians because it doesn't splinter. In other words, you can make bowls out of it, you can make utensils, you can make things to hold your hair back, little pegs. A lot of pines will give you splinters and infections, and nobody wants that when you're living in the woods, and a regular infection can kill you. So they had a healthy respect for that type of materials. The bobs here are, the top part is bone, and these are the guard hairs from porcupines. I don't know if people realize it, but literally there's 30,000 different size quills on the average porcupine. So what I did was I took a very thin copper strand and wove the beads and sections of the quill work together in a black, red, white pattern, and then again inlaid that into the frame to give an example of how that would look. And the wood is basswood. The porcupine quill work, I gather those and/or trade them with a guy named Black Dog Miller up in the Eagle River area in Wisconsin. And I inlay those into the frames, again, just as a representational effect, showing in a modern day how beautiful they can look, to give you an idea of how they would have looked, 300-400 years ago when they used them on their, clothing, their moccasins, and sacred pouches. Obviously we can't, it would be wrong to try to duplicate that and pass it off as something that's, authentic. But there's nothing wrong with showing the beauty of something used in a new way and explain, to the people how they would have used them. I've been to 18 states researching this over 20 years, and I've had to go out, hike through the muck and, cold weather. These are hand sculpted, smaller, a little smaller versions. And then this is a hard resin cast from my bronze version of the 26-inch trail marker tree. So it's kind of grown from the 9 to the 26 to the 16 foot. And hopefully in the end it'll be a 16-foot bronze that'll be permanently placed somewhere.